Good afternoon, everyone. Can I just check that you can hear me before we start? Yes, good. I do like to get a few thumbs up. That's the first bit of audience participation this afternoon, and you've all passed the test. Welcome to you all, and to those of you who are watching online, to this Visit Inverness Loch Ness Visitor Levy information event with Highland Council. I'm Marr, and my job today is to act as an impartial facilitator of this afternoon's event. We're really grateful to Highland Council for joining us. Thank you, Mcleod, Assistant Chief Executive Place for Highland Council, and Sheila Armstrong is here as well. She's not on the stage yet, but she will be joining us for the panel discussion. She is Chief Officer for Revenues and Commercialisation. I'm going to introduce the panellists, and then I will start with questions. I will try and be as fair as I can to all speakers and to all of you who are in the audience. I'm afraid those of you who are watching at home, it's a watching role only that you have, but you do still have an opportunity to take part in the consultation online. Can I emphasise, though, that even although you've turned up today and Malcolm and Sheila will hear everything that you are saying, it's vital that you still complete the online consultation and you do that before the cut-off date of the 31st of March in order to make your views on a visitor levy for Highland heard. Visit Inverness Loch Ness have brought this panel together, industry representatives and people who act on behalf of suppliers in the tourism and hospitality sectors. And we expect this afternoon to be an opportunity for some really fair and frank discussion and an open exchange of knowledge and information. Now, unfortunately, we've heard that Mark Crothall from the Scottish Tourism Alliance is unable to join us. He was due to be here, but for personal reasons, he has not been able to make it in person. But he did send me a copy of a speech, and I will read that out on his behalf. Some of the questions that we'll be covering have been submitted in advance. The Highland Hotels Association and Visit Inverness Loch Ness went out to their memberships and said, what is it that you need to know? Now, I'm sure if we just went to the floor, a lot of you want to know the same things. Just so to shortcut a lot of that, what we've done is we've collated those questions into some of the main headings. And if you are here today and I'm asking the question that you want to know the answer to, and I'm not asking it in exactly the right way, I hope that you'll forgive me. And of course, we will be opening to the floor, so there's an opportunity for you to catch up on anything that I may have missed. I know feelings have been running high. I'm aware of Facebook groups. I'm aware of a lot of press, a lot of stuff that's been reported and said, pretty well mostly against this proposal of the visitor levy. And I don't know why I'm pointing at you there, Malcolm, but I was, and my apologies for that. I know that feelings have been running high, so I would ask everyone please to remain as respectful as they are able to during the discussions. We're not all going to agree on everything. That would be incredibly boring if we did, but I will ask that we try and disagree agreeably if that is possible. This meeting is being recorded and it will all be available on the Visit Inverness Loch Ness Tourist Levy page. It's available to you all and it will be sent to everybody who registered to attend here as well. And it will also be shared with Highland Council. I say I am an impartial facilitator here, but I do have 2 points that I need to declare before we get any further. Until earlier this summer, I was a columnist for Highland News and Media. It was a 22-year shift. And during those 22 years, I wrote, I think, 2 or 3 times in favour of there being a tourist tax, a visitor levy for Highlands. That was based on my experience of being abroad, of paying it abroad, and of seeing the impact that it had in some of the places that we travelled to. One of them in particular was Lake Annecy, where there's a huge number of tourists, and I know because they told us, they were very, very public in what had been bought with tourist tax money. So I felt, although I was a tourist and adding to that problem, I felt a little bit proud that my money was being spent in improving the area for both tourists and for locals alike. That's where I stood then. I'm parking that just now, but I'm letting you all know that that has been my position in the past, because some of you may know that anyway, and be blaming, thinking, oh, well, I'm not partial, I'm on one side or the other. The other thing I need to confess is that I do have a connection with one of the panellists. I'm Nikki Marr. Sitting in the middle there is Colin Marr, and he's the Chief Executive of Inverness Chamber of Commerce. He also happens to be my husband. Colin and I don't agree on everything, certainly not personally, and certainly not in terms of work, and I will not be agreeing with everything he's saying, I'm fairly certain, today either. We've got till 3 o'clock, after which time there will be tea and coffee just outside the studio for those of you who wish to stay and carry on the conversation. None of you, though, came to hear from me. You came to hear from our panellists and to hear their answers to your questions. Malcolm Mcleod is the Assistant Chief Executive of Highland Council, and he has responsibility for Place. Malcolm will be speaking first. He'll be followed by Colin Marr, the Chief Executive of Inverness Chamber of Commerce, then by Craig Ewan, who is Operations Director of the Kingsmills Group, my apologies, but here in his capacity today as Vice Chair of the Highland Hotels Association. And as I mentioned, Mark Crothall from the SGA would have been our fourth speaker. He can't be here in person, but I do have his statement and I will share that with you. And I promise to try and read all the words in all the right order. And Sheila Armstrong is also here from Highland Council, and she will join us on the panel for questions as we get to that stage. I think that's enough by way of introductions. I'm sure that you all know that we're not expecting a fire alarm, so really run for your lives. I think it's out through that door if it all happens. If you really want, we can open the curtains and you can try and jump into the tennis courts, but absolutely not to be recommended. I'm going to hand over to you now, Malcolm. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting us along. We're really keen. I think Nikki said we weren't going to agree on everything, but the one thing we have already agreed on was the consultation that's underway at the moment was not long enough, so we have extended that through till the 31st of March. And we've got a lot of work to do between now and the end of the consultation, and indeed afterwards, to determine how we go forward. Now, I'm assuming that a lot of people in the room are experts, or at least are knowledgeable about what is currently proposed and the background to it. So I don't want to spend too much time going over that. And I do want to focus instead on some of the key areas that I think we do need to talk about, and we need to get the feedback from those of you in the audience who are running business, who are running our hospitality trade. And we really want to keep working as we move through consultation and indeed afterwards, as I will explain after that. So I'm going to whiz through. The slides will be available should you need any further information. But obviously you know what the overview is. The levy was passed by Scottish Parliament, and that means that some of the comments we are receiving are already set in legislation. So there are some things that we are unable to change, even if we were wanting to. So things like the percentage rate, etc. So I just wanted to start with that. There are some things that we are bound into a legislative framework on, but others we are definitely able to change and make local exceptions to the overall framework. So you can see above the timeline that we are working to. So we have extended the consultation, as I've said. A decision in the spring. You know, we're getting a lot of feedback, as you can imagine, a lot of technical feedback. So there's a lot of work to do between now and the time we bring it back to members, when a decision will be made, and that'll be made by all of the council. So that's 74 elected members from right across the Highlands, north, south, east and west. So that means that a launch of the levy would be, if it were, brought forward at the earliest winter 2026. And the importance of that period between the time that any decision is made, and if that's a positive decision to go with the levy, that then gives an 18-month period to get through the technical and other administrative elements, plus, importantly, developing out our investment plan in collaboration with the industry and communities who would benefit from such a income stream. So just a quick overview. I'm not going to go into it in detail. It's set out here. The proposed scheme, and that's what it is, a proposed scheme. It is not an agreed scheme, and that's why we are going through this long, detailed consultation period. It would apply indefinitely. It's about overnight accommodation, applied every day throughout the year, percentage rates of 5%, and the net proceeds to be spent on sustaining, supporting and developing facilities or services used by leisure or business visitors with advice from a visitor levy forum. And that visitor levy forum is an absolutely critical part of this. It's set out in legislation that we need to have it in place, and we will be bringing forward that over the next few months, should the levy go ahead. You can see here, annual reports are mandatory. We need to be demonstrating that we are giving value back, that we are demonstrating the process works well. At the moment, we're not proposing local exceptions, but we can. And again, we're getting feedback through the consultation of what some of these local exemptions might be. And we are here to listen and get advice from the industry and indeed other groups. Reimbursement arrangements available for disability benefits, and a national digital portal. And I know this is one of the key things for businesses about the burden there will be from an administrative or a cost point of view. The national digital portal is currently under development to administer and manage the levy. Now, what in my 5 minutes that I've got left, I think it's really important to go back to what is the purpose of this levy. I've heard various things in the media, on social media, that this is a money grab, if I can put it as bluntly as that. That is simply not the case. This is about sustaining, developing and supporting the tourism industry, and that's what we want to do. My role as Assistant Chief Executive in the Council, I cover a whole range of services relating to the place, whether that's in terms of roads, in terms of tourism, in terms of regeneration, in terms of economic development projects. And over the years that I've been here, we have been dealing with very significant issues. 4,000 miles of roads in Highland, 1,400 bridges, just to name two fairly stark facts, that in order to sustain a successful tourism industry, that does come with a huge burden on us to make sure things are developed at the appropriate time and services are put into place to manage our fantastic environment that attracts millions of visitors every year. So what we did was produce a sustainable tourism strategy at the end of November. That sets out the Council's ambition for sustainable tourism. And, you know, it has a number of focus areas that are really important and have come from not just the impact post-COVID particularly of some of the examples we can all give of perhaps over-tourism, the perception that some areas don't have the infrastructure needed to continue as we are, and how we can actually boost the tourism offer of the area. These are effective visitor management. We've all seen over the last few years the impact that certain types of tourism have had on our area, the need to maintain and develop facilities that support tourism. Protecting our environment, making sure that we protect the environment that people are coming to, and that brings with it its own pressures, particularly in a time of financial constraint across the whole public sector. Unlocking tourism benefits for our communities. We work really well with communities. We prepared a tourism infrastructure plan, which has a whole range of different projects that are ready on the stocks, waiting to be delivered. And I think we can offer the opportunity, at least, of a sustainable source of funding to bring forward some of these benefits. Celebrating our culture and heritage. I think there's broad recognition that perhaps some areas we don't shout about, promote enough, or indeed support enough across our whole area, whether that's related to culture, music, and other events that will attract additional visitors to the area. Sorry, I'll just check my time. And then business growth and skilled workforce. So one of the comments that I've had over many years, but particularly in the last few years, are some of the pressures that the tourism industry is suffering from availability of staff, access to training, access to housing. These are real issues that we struggle to fund always. But again, we've got to try and find a joined up way of making sure that what business wants, business can get. We have our own pressures as a council when it comes to, say, for example, accommodation, where we are driven by statutory requirements. So in that sense, finding models that work for the tourism industry who perhaps are more seasonal in some areas, or indeed may have staffing requirements that don't necessarily meet many of the requirements you would if, for example, you were a council tenant. That's a real issue for us and a real challenge. What I wanted to do just as I finish is perhaps just to go through some of the areas. The slides that you'll see will give access to the consultation. It's really, really important that we get feedback. I know there's a lot of opposition to the principle of the levy, and that's fine. But if there is to be a levy, what could make it more acceptable? What could make it more palatable? What are your concerns, and can we work together to address them? Because otherwise, we want this, if it's going to go ahead, to work for the benefit of everybody. So if it's about levels of rates, if it's about exemptions, if it's about business support, if it's about the types of projects you would like a levy spent on, then please get back to us on that basis as well, irrespective of the views. Just very briefly, Nikki, I'll just finish off with a few examples of where we've seen really good developments that, again, if we look ahead to the future, we can focus on. I'm responsible for the store in Skye. We've put in huge investment there around car parking, toilets, and a retail facility there, which is generating benefits for that part of Skye, which was suffering significantly from pressure from tourism traffic. Mcleod Beach, we've just put in car parking and public toilets. These are projects that require funding, and we've been lucky because we've been able to fund them, but I see this as a means of us promoting. We're developing Inverness Castle. It's in one of the highlights to visit in some trade magazines for next year. That's going to be fantastic for Inverness. Northern Meeting Park, the Bucht, things like downhill mountain bike for Fort William. That only comes if there's money to subsidise it. It didn't happen last year because there wasn't the money to subsidise it, and Warner Brothers went elsewhere. These are the kinds of things we need to be looking ahead and seeing how we can improve the offer in the Highland area. I've said too much now, but hopefully I'll be able to address any questions you've got, and I would encourage you to contribute to the consultation.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. A big thank you to Visit Inverness Loch Ness for asking me to speak. As Nikki said, I'm the Chief Executive of Inverness Chamber of Commerce, but I'm speaking today on behalf of all the Highland Chambers. That's Caithness, Cairngorm, Inverness and Lochaber. Between us, we represent over 1,200 business members. For each of us, the visitor levy is currently the single issue which is most prevalent in our inboxes, and it's my role to express the views that our members are expressing to us. Shortly before Christmas, we issued a joint statement asking Highland Council to pause their consultation and to pause the implementation of the visitor levy. We did that because we are increasingly convinced that the levy will do the tourism sector more harm than it will good. In the next few minutes, I'll tell you why we decided to publicly oppose the implementation, what we think is wrong with the current proposal, and what we think Highland Council should do next. As Chambers of Commerce, we always prefer to work closely with the Council to try find solutions which are acceptable to both them and to our business members. It's really unusual for us to publicly oppose something in this manner. In this case, however, we felt that the consultation was not truly allowing people to express their views, that the consultation had come too early when there are still too many undecided factors, and that the levy proposal is so fundamentally flawed that there's not enough time within the consultation period to sort it out. Now, in saying that, we recognise that most of the flaws are actually in the Scottish Government legislation, not with the Highland Council proposal. But that means that it will take longer to solve, not less time. For the sake of time, I'll just give you some selected highlights of our thinking. So why do we think the consultation is not truly allowing people to express their views? Highland Council are consulting on introducing a 5% levy. The consultation document gives options to propose 6%, 7%, 8%. It doesn't give options to propose 1, 2, 3 or 4%. Highland Council's promotion of the consultation is always presented alongside the benefits that the extra money will bring. And I'm on board with what Malcolm said, that extra money will bring. But it feels like they are campaigning for the result rather than truly consulting. To my knowledge, it's never been presented alongside the business concerns, which are well known. Why is it too early? The Highland Council Tourism Strategy is the guiding document for how the funds will be spent. Our view is that the strategy document is aspirational. It has many desired and positive outcomes, all of which we would support, but that there is far too little detail on what the actual projects would be and what the actual spend would be, what is actually required to achieve these outcomes. It could be that the spend will be transformative for our industry in a positive way, and we should all remain open to that. But at the moment, there simply isn't enough detail for us to make that judgment and to respond to the consultation in an informed manner. Highland Council hadn't taken any steps to set up the Visitor Levy Forum. It is an important part of the process. It's the body which will give them advice on how the money is spent. What we need to know in advance of the consultation is who's likely to be on that forum and whether we think the industry is properly represented. There have now been steps to set up a shadow forum, and that's having its first meeting on Friday. The collection method for the levy is still unknown, so we can't judge the costs and the administrative burden that it will put on top of the tourism operators. But most importantly, what is wrong with the proposal? The accommodation sector in the Highlands is suffering. Room occupancy has fallen for the last 2 years, and independent estimates are that hospitality inflation is currently running at around 8%. That means that profits are significantly down as prices can't rise fast enough to maintain margins. The UK budget increased employers' national insurance burden for every business. If there were tourism businesses who were able to pay this levy, that disappeared when that budget came in October. In Highland, when you move beyond Inverness, our providers are heavily affected by seasonality and are heavily affected by fuel costs, much more so than in the rest of Scotland, so margins are much tighter. The levy, and again please remember this bit is the Scottish Government, not Highland Council, has to be included in room rates and in business turnover. But what that means is that the levy is subject to VAT. I can't think of another tax which has a tax on top of it. It also means that the levy counts towards the VAT threshold for a business. We are aware, you're probably all aware, of businesses who deliberately stay below the threshold, and they do that by shortening their season. The result of the levy will be that they shorten their season even further, so available rooms will shrink, therefore tourism will shrink. As Chambers, we often have the privilege of some businesses sharing their results with us. We are convinced that most accommodation providers can't afford to pay the levy, and we are certain that it will lead to closure for some operators. Again, that will mean the rooms will shrink and tourism will shrink, not grow. Highland Council have estimated that their own costs in admin and collection will be around £550,000 per year. That will be deducted from the levy before it's spent. However, the proposed scheme does not allow the collector to have any compensation for their admin burden in collecting it. And at the moment, the method of collecting is unknown, so that burden and that cost is unknown. But while the collection scheme isn't established, we know that collection of a percentage is much more complex than collection of a flat fee. Across Europe, where visitor levies are often in place, it's nearly always a flat fee. The proposal for Wales is a £1.25 flat fee. The successful scheme in Manchester is a £1 flat fee. Where successful schemes run in Europe, they're almost always running in cities with far lower VAT rates than in Scotland. The highest that I could find was 13% in Europe. Now, supporters of the scheme will say that it's not the businesses that pay, it's the tourists that pay. So it won't affect businesses. There are two issues with that. If you believe that, then you also know that locals will pay it. We live in a large region. Anyone coming down from, say, Caithness to Inverness to do business will pay it. Anyone coming to visit someone in hospital will pay it. But of course, the tax in reality is rolled into room rate. So it's part of the accommodation provider's turnover, so in reality the business pays, and it's no different from any other tax. What this all means, in my view, is that the visitor levy is actually a high-risk gamble. There's every possibility that tourism will fall as a result of the levy, perhaps because some tourists are put off by increased room rates, but almost certainly because some businesses will close as a result, and that will lead to less accommodation. Highland Council estimate that the income will be around 10 million. What I'm more interested in is not the income to Highland Council, but what the total income from tourism to the region is. And not just the council. All tourists, of course, spend far beyond what they spend in accommodation. They spend in bars, they spend in shops, they spend in restaurants. Any business closure leads to loss of employment. And so it would take a pretty tiny decline in tourism as a result, far smaller than a 5% decline, to mean that the region was negatively affected rather than positively affected as a result. So before going ahead, I think Highland Council have to be really certain of the impact. And to take that risk, I think they need to do a full and independent economic assessment, which, to my knowledge, is not in place. So what should Highland Council do? So to go back to what I said at the beginning, the Chambers, we want to work with the Council to get an answer that works. And I believe that there is an openness to that from Highland Council. We also have sympathy. Highland region has greater tourism numbers than most other parts of Scotland. That means there's greater pressure on infrastructure and money is needed to support that infrastructure. The Council needs the money that the levy will bring in. There's no question about that. But the truth is that accommodation providers are already taxed heavily enough. But that tax gets stuck. It gets stuck at Westminster, it gets stuck at Holyrood, it doesn't come to Highland Council. And that's where we think the Council should take action. We believe that Highland Council should be telling the Scottish Government that they need the money from the levy, but the levy scheme as it's currently designed is not workable and cannot be implemented. They should demand changes in the legislation. We will support them in doing that, so that there's an option to implement a flat rate, and so that there's an option to do it without it being part of the provider's turnover, without it being subject to VAT, etc. While waiting for these changes, they should ask the Scottish Government for the 10 million that they're not going to get. Why not? It's a small amount of money for Scottish Government, and Highland Council should be able to make a strong case that Highland tourism is crucially important to all of Scotland, and that Highland Council's costs in supporting tourism are actually greater than for most other regions. Once these changes in legislation have been made, Highland Council should then sit down with the business community and design a scheme that works. But before going back out to consultation, they should make sure that there's an established system for collection and compensation for collection, a fully worked up proposal for who sits in the Visitor Levy Forum, a detailed plan for how the first 3 years of the levy will be spent, and an independent impact assessment to ensure that the region as a whole will benefit from the levy. So that is what we meant when we asked for a pause. Not for a short pause, but enough time for a complete redesign, a change in legislation, and a consultation that only starts after everything is in place. Thank you.
Colin, thank you very much for your 10 minutes there. It was very, very useful. And in terms of the notes that I've put together, very, very similar in some of the facts that I was going to deliver. I was conscious that that was always going to be the case this afternoon. So in actual fact, I can actually make the most of our opportunity and not duplicate everything that I've got in my notes. In terms of the first image I've got up here, it wasn't actually the correct image that I was looking for. I was actually looking for a starting line with a false start. And that's how the Highland Hotel Association felt when we were invited to take part in the testing with Visit Scotland and Scottish Government back in March 2024. So I represented it and went on to the mandatory guidance. And was sent the pack in advance, 75 pages, as most of you have now read. And then we had a call later that week. And the first major concern I had was the percentage model that we've questioned and Colin's documented this afternoon as well. And as I challenged that percentage model, I was shot down in flames and was told, I'm sorry, but we've passed that stage. And I said, well, how can we pass that stage? This is a consultation, and the Act's not gone through yet. And there was other voices concerned throughout that process around the percentage. However, that consultation finished, and the Act went through. And as we all know, that's currently where we are in terms of a percentage model. Very frustrating. 28th of May, the Act went through. This giving the local authority the option to choose to implement after consultation or not. So my next slide here is representing the wrong decision. That percentage has been written into the Act. In June, the Highland Hotel Association discussed with all members extensively what we now had as a proposal and coming our way. We lobbied various MSPs, councillors. We asked to meet with the Highland Council after a few weeks of chasing, and we met with myself and various other representatives from Highland Council and Visit Inverness Loch Ness. That was Friday, 23rd of August, we met. At that meeting, Malcolm agreed that that percentage was not the way that he would have liked to implement it. We agreed too, and Colin's agreed that this afternoon. My question is, why have the Highland Council not gone back and challenged the Scottish Government via COSLA under the Verity House Agreement? Yes, this would be slow. It would slow down the implementation. However, if we're going to do it and do a visitor levy, do it right and do it right from the beginning. At the same meeting, there was reference that extensive consultation was carried out in 2019, with 54% of the participation in favour of the visitor levy. Well, from a Highland Hotel Association, there's 25 of us, and none of the 25 hotels were involved in that consultation in 2019. Also, in 2019, it was referenced that in that consultation, it was referenced at a suggested £1 per room, as opposed to a 5%. The visitor levy will apply to accommodation provided in the region. It's intended to apply to every room, every night, regardless of where the guest is from, a visitor, a tourist, a domestic resident, a local corporate, somebody on leisure. The UK already has the highest VAT in Europe. It's expensive and it's uncompetitive in some areas already. The way the Act has been written is that this VAT and this visitor levy is inclusive of the rate. It's not visible, so our tourist doesn't actually know, as we do when we go to Europe and we check into our hotel and we're given a separate piece of paper, we're asked for the 1, 2 or 3 euros per night, which everybody finds acceptable and actually knows that that's going towards a visitor levy. An example of Sicily at 2 euros per night. The Act is intended to be permanent. It's not planned for a fixed period of time. It will produce reports annually and it will be reviewed every 3 years. The Highland Council can increase the percentage with a suitable notice period. Colin's mentioned this already. The way they act, the tax, has been written is tax on tax. It's treated as revenue and it's subject to VAT. So that tax plus 20% is 6%, so effectively our VAT moves to 26%. It pushes up the selling rate further. Due to that additional tax, some small operators, bed and breakfast, guest houses, they may struggle and push because it would take them over the £90,000 VAT threshold. What will they do? Well, they'll choose to close more and make sure that their revenue doesn't exceed that £90,000 in some cases. Is that what we want our visitors to be faced when we're in remote parts of the Highlands and we've already got limited availability? No, it's not. In terms of every hotelier and operator is responsible for collecting that tax and passing on. The Scottish Government is designing a portal to be able to track the business and ensure the local authority receives their monies. However, each hotel and each property will have to fund their PMS systems or softwares to be updated, which will be significant. Hotels and bed and breakfasts also use what we call OTAs, other travel agencies. Sometimes these commissions can be up to 25%. I don't believe that this has been taken into the equation in terms of calculating the tax, and in actual fact the full room rate, including the commission, would be calculated on. Back in May, no financial impact study was available from the Scottish Government, from Visit Scotland or the Highland Council for the proposed impact to the Highlands. We challenged this and the Highland Council responded to us to say that there would be and that it would be part of the consultation process. However, we were surprised because we thought that part would have been done first. Therefore, the Highland Hotel Association and Visit Inverness Loch Ness commissioned their own independent analysis report from Safri's. Obviously, from a budget point of view, it was smaller because it was only involving the 25 hotels and the access that we had from Visit Inverness Loch Ness. This was concluded in August and shared with all. And if anybody would like a copy of it, we can share that with you. In summary, it was a number of highlights in there. The UK period of high inflation, which we all suffered from 21, 22 and 23. Hotels naturally fall behind that curve of high inflation in terms of being able to actually increase their average room rates and their selling price at the same as inflation for a number of reasons. One, the customer wouldn't swallow it in terms of the level of that inflation. And two, because we're dealing with group operators and travel and trade operators, we're working 18 months to 24 months in advance. So those room rates were already set before the high inflation periods came in. In August 2024, we were back down to just over 2% inflation. However, in hotel terms, we were still probably operating between 7 and 8% due to the products that we buy and the inflation that was still on those products. Inverness in the statistics of the SDR figures, are the only city in Scotland for their occupancies to be going backwards year on year. I think that tells a story. Where does that some of the story come from? Well, in 2024, it was probably the hoteliers' opportunity after the high inflation for them to be able to actually get real increase on their rates in 2024 because they programmed it from 22 or from 23, particularly including their groups and their travel trade. So when we actually look at the information that was provided through SDR, through the Highland Hotel Associations, we can see if we chose the month of August, we had a growth of 8% in average rate. However, in August, which should be one of our peak months of the year, we had a 12% decline in occupancy. So if we just look at the sample within the Highland Hotel Association, which is 1,500 bed nights, that's 193 bed nights fewer than the year before. That's 6,000 bed nights less for the 1 month, and that's 11,000 visitors less for the 1 month of August. And again, if we make reference to the Safari report, they used a very conservative figure of £65 of an average spend out with the hotels. So the hotels are suffering because the occupancy has gone back, but the spend locally to the community on cafes, pubs, restaurants, attractions of £65 per day, that equates to £715,000, a loss in 1 month. So if we actually applied that statistic wider, and we did it within the Highland Hotels for the whole year, the Safari report suggests a decrease of 9% in occupancy, which is 50,000 rooms, 89,000 visitors, and a less spend to the local economy of 5.7 million, and that's only on the 26 hotels. Highland Hotel Association fears the implementation of the visitor levy at 5% will become a barrier to sale. We are already challenged by our group and our travel trade operators who are working 24 months in advance. What's happening to your rates? Their feedback is that they're sending clients to the Highlands of Scotland, which is already expensive. It's expensive to get there. It's a challenge to get around the attractions. The attractions are fantastic, but it's more expensive to move from attraction to attraction than it is in other parts of the UK and other parts of Europe. We're not only competing domestically, but we're competing with other countries. Their client base is coming from predominantly North America, Australia, and further afield, looking for different experiences within Europe. We are in the toughest trading conditions in hospitality in my 30 years in this industry. We've got major concerns with the implementation of the levy. The industry is very fragile. Examples over the last 3 years, if you look at Kingsmill's 21% increase in sales, yet our profitability has gone back 6%, and we work as hard as we can to protect that, but we just can't with the costs, the way they've escalated. We have hotel members, which I'm not going to name, within the HHA, who've shared with us that they haven't made a pound of profit until August this year from January. That same hotel is also forecasting by the time it gets to November, we'll be back in a loss-making situation. So yes, there are concerns from smaller operators in more remote locations, and they're valid concerns. However, sometimes the perception of the city centre hotels, because we're busy, we're always making lots of money. That's not the case. We can run at 95% in November and make no real profit at all. But why do we do it? Well, we keep our teams employed because we need those teams to handle the volume in those summer months. Minimum wage continues to increase. Our grassroots has increased over the last 6 years at 46%, or if you looked at over 4 years, it's increased at 35%. That's a good thing. People need these increases but it's got to come from somewhere. We've not been able to increase our average room rate by 46% or 35% over the same period of time. In April 2025, the new increase in the national insurance payments of 2% and a threshold changing from 9,100 to 5,000 is phenomenal and will hurt us all. An example of that in Kings Mill's case will be £160,000 will come off the bottom line just to pay for the national insurance increase. Business rates relief has not been applied to hotels, as it has been in other parts of the UK, unless your hotel rateable value is under £51,000. When I looked at that and researched that, out of all the hotels, there's one small hotel in Tongue, out of all the Highland, out of our hotels, there's one small hotel in Tongue that applies. So the rate relief is not there for anybody else. If the visitor levy is passed in winter 2026, it will be our bleakest winter yet. Highland Hotel Association do not support the visitor levy for all the reasons shared. We urge the Highland Council to get closer to the industry and really understand our profitability as hotels, how we operate, both big and small. We launched this petition here just Thursday last week. As of 11 o'clock this morning, 11:30 this morning, there was 2,613 votes of signatories on that petition. We will email all of those people on there and we will ask them to complete the consultation form, as we will ourselves. We also have pages of comments from guests who stay with us not supporting the visitor levy. In conclusion, the proposed visitor levy is wrong, poorly designed, at the wrong time in its current format. I'm not being over dramatic. The Highland Hotel Association has massive concerns for the industry and the effect it would have on the wider community. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig. And there is a final statement. As I said, we should have had Mark Crothall here from the Scottish Tourism Alliance. He couldn't be here, so I will be him for the purposes of the next few minutes while I read out his statement. And you can tell I'm being him and not me because I put my specs on. As the largest member organisation for tourism and hospitality businesses in Scotland and the leading representative body for the sector, the Scottish Tourism Alliance, STA, is extremely concerned over plans from Highland Council and other local authorities across Scotland to introduce a visitor levy at this current time. With continuing economic pressures on business and consumers, the deep concerns re the emerging complexity of a percentage-based charging model and the need for implementing systems for its collection, we strongly recommend that Highland Council and others pause their current visitor levy activities. This pause should be used to focus on comprehensively reviewing the cost and administrative burden of introducing a visitor levy scheme on businesses, addressing outstanding issues, and evaluating the overall implications for competitiveness of the Highlands and wider Scotland as a visitor destination. As has always been the case, the STA has advocated for and continues to make the case to the Scottish Government that a fixed flat fee is a simpler charge to administer and less damaging to overall competitiveness than the percentage model required in the legislation. Many businesses and residents in the Highlands don't even know that a visitor levy is on the horizon for them, or they remain unaware of its implications. We strongly believe that Highland Council is nowhere near being ready to formally consult on the decision to introduce a scheme. The work undertaken by the City of Edinburgh Council has been done across several years, and it is still coming across several complex issues that need to be resolved. For example, we have significant concerns about a new revision to the proposed City of Edinburgh's Council visitor levy scheme that would require a visitor levy to start being collected from the 1st of May 2025 this year for any booking from July 26 onwards. We cannot stress enough that the 18-month implementation period, as set out in the legislation, must be used to give businesses time to test and introduce systems to collect a levy and to communicate this new major change to consumers. We continue to make representation to the City of Edinburgh Council on this issue, and we urge Highland Council to factor in the appropriate time needed for businesses to introduce systems to capture a levy charge. Introducing a successful visitor levy scheme is about the right application, the right place, the right time, if it is to act as a force for good that enhances our visitor offer and appeal. However, the SDA believes none of these conditions of success are currently in place. Instead, adopting the policy now will cause more harm than good. The voice of the 4 Highland Chambers of Commerce is loud and clear that implementing a visitor levy at this time would have significant negative consequences for tourism to the Highlands, which is already facing numerous challenges. A rush to introduce a visitor levy will damage the essential tourism and hospitality businesses that the Highland area relies on to support jobs and to attract visitors, along with displacing visitor spend that would normally be spent in the shops, cafes, restaurants, visitors' attractions and pubs in local communities. As has been the case with short-term lets, we are concerned that rather than leading on good tourism policy making, Scotland is now routinely being used as an example of how not to repeat our mistakes. With the direction of current travel on the visitor levy, we cannot afford to get this wrong and it being another lesson learnt for our competitors. That is too high a price to pay. Now that's the end of Mark's speech, but I have another 2 pages from him. The additional points he's made, effectively more detail under this being the wrong application. It shouldn't be a percentage charging model. It being the wrong time, because as we've heard so well from Craig there, this is a really, really tough time for tourism. And also the wrong place. Unlike international cities that are looking to manage down visitor numbers by charging a levy, we actively want and need to attract more visitors across all parts of Scotland and at different times of the year. So that is what Mark Crothall would have said had he been here. Unfortunately, we don't have the benefit of him being here to answer any questions that you or Malcolm may have, but that is what he would have said had he been able to join us. So thank you to Mark for sending that statement, and thank you to all of our speakers so far. Thank you very much. So before we start with the questions, and I think some of the questions even that came in will have been answered by what Malcolm said in his presentation, but more, I guess, have been asked by what Colin and Craig and Mark have raised. I thought I would ask for a quick show of hands just to get the temperature in the room amongst those of you who are here. So on the basis of what you have just heard, or on the basis of your own knowledge, your own experience, what you have researched and discovered for yourselves, I'm going to give you 3 options. I'd like you to listen to them all, and I'd like you to then, with a show of hands, vote for which one you agree with most. So the first is, I agree in principle with a visitor levy and the way in which it is proposed that it will be collected and administered across Highland. That's the first one. The second, I agree in principle with a visitor levy, but I disagree with the way in which it is proposed that it will be collected and administered in Highland. And the third, I don't agree with the idea of a visitor levy at all. So number 1, and I'd like you to raise your hands if you agree with it. I agree in principle with a visitor levy and the way in which it is proposed that it will be collected and administered. And this is obviously open to our panel to vote on as well. Does anybody think, yes, I want this visitor levy, and yes, I want this proposal from Highland Council? Was that hand up? No, you're just playing with your hair. So that's no. Is that a right across the board? No.
I'm politically neutral.
Politically neutral. I respect that. I respect that, Malcolm. I agree in principle with a visitor levy, but disagree with the way in which it's proposed. It will be collected and administered. Where are we on that? And hands straight up, please. Okay, so that I would say is, what would you think? More than half the room? About half the room? Okay, so Malcolm has parked his political impartiality with both hands.
That was a middle ground.
Was it really? About half the room, we think. About half the room? Okay, we'll go with that. And I agree in principle. I do not want a visitor levy at all. That's less than half. I would say maybe about a fifth of the room. So what about the rest of you? Who didn't put their hand up? Sorry? Did anyone not put their hand up? So we're just going to we've got a couple of microphones. I'll ask you to wait until you get the microphone. It's a small room and we can all hear you, but this is being recorded and broadcast, so the people who are watching at home won't be able to. Can you just tell us, give us your name if you wish to do so, where you're coming from and what you would like to see? Why didn't you vote on that?
I think the three...
Yeah, it's on. We can hear you fine.
I think the three questions are too narrow.
So what's your position on it then?
Well, I think, there's lots of issues in the visitor levy. I mean, I would like to know the rationale behind the proposal, as is. I would like to know the rationale behind them not accepting some of the pleas at the moment, so that would be for number 2. And for number 3, there's many anomalies that have been raised in the proposal around who would be liable to pay it, and more importantly, who would not pay it.
Okay, but so one of the options was, I agree in principle with visitor levy. Is that your situation? Do you agree in principle that there should be something?
Not entirely.
Not entirely.
But I'm not against it, but I would need to be convinced.
So that the other part of that middle option then for all of our audience was, but I don't agree in the way it's proposed that it will be either collected or administered. But that doesn't go far enough for you. You've got far more questions still to answer.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. That's fair. Thank you very much for clarifying that. A gentleman in the middle there had his hand up. Was it you that had your hand up? Gentleman with the dark suit and blue tie there. Do you know, I haven't got my specs on. And in fact, I've got the wrong specs. You better introduce yourself so that I'm not publicly humiliated here.
No problem, Kev Stacey from 40.
Oh, hello! I didn't recognise you again. I never recognise you if you don't have your cycle helmet on.
No, I just think I need a bit more information, really. So again, pretty much pigeonholed into 3 different options there. And if I was to give you this little note that I wrote, I think it was from Colin, which was 10 million revenue, which I think is a paltry sum for the cost that's going to incur across all businesses, you see. So I think 10 million is a drop in the ocean, really, to actually what's it's going to cost. So that probably swings me more to being against it in that respect. But it needs more flushing out, I think, so.
More flushing out.
Yes.
Well, let's try and do that in the 55 minutes that we have left. Thank you very much, and I will promise to try and recognise you again. I think I probably walked past you the last time I saw you as well. But that's between the two of us and nobody else needs to get involved. I will ask those questions again and see if anybody's mind has been changed by the time we reach the end of our discussion. But I'd like now to invite Sheila Armstrong to join us for this panel discussion. Please give her a nice warm welcome. She is from Highland Council as well. So Visit Inverness and the Highland Hotels Association went out to their members and asked for questions to be submitted. We've got them in, and they were collated and put together in sort of clumps. I'm wondering, actually, having heard all of the presentations, whether some of these have been asked and answered already. But because so many of you asked them, I'm going to quickly try and go through some of them. And I wonder, first one is for Highland Council. If I turn my back, can you still hear me? Or I'll try and get a little bit closer to the mic if I possibly can. We are officially in a consultation period, and Malcolm, you did explain there that has been extended. Is the proposed 5% visitor levy on all overnight stays from probably the end of 2026 across Highland, is it actually a done deal? Lots of the questions are, consultation period is just a box-ticking exercise. Why bother when the Highland Council have already made up their mind?
Okay, so I would like to be really, really clear on this.
Please do.
That we have proposed something. We are doing this consultation because we want to hear what not just businesses but also communities and other interested parties have to say. So it is not fixed. When this goes back, there'll be a full analysis of all of the responses, including some of the more technical reports that we're receiving. And that'll be done in an open, transparent way, and we will make recommendations to members. So what I would say is things we're stuck with that helpfully Mark, I think, pointed out our legislative issues. Colin, you know as well as I do how these things work. I don't think it's just a question of Highland Council pitching up at Scottish Government and saying you've got to change this. The legislation is in place. Anyway, sorry. So my point was that we are really interested in, if you don't agree with 5%, you would prefer 10% or 1%, then make that clear in your response. There is scope within the consultation response form to allow you to do that, and that would be really helpful to us. I think some of the other things that we haven't really touched on, but again, we're looking for feedback on are, the possibility of what local exemptions may be in place. We touched on, I think one of the speakers touched on the people who will be paying the levy, and yes, it is everyone at the moment. There are a lot of comments coming in, for example, about hospital visits or prison visits or other exemptions we should make. There are comments coming in on, we've got a lot of accommodation locked up with contract workers who come to the area for extended periods of time. Should that be, the subject of any form of exemption? Please let us know. And then one of the other things that we've heard a lot about, and I totally understand it, is there's the cost to business in terms of administrative burdens and pressures. We don't have the system up and running yet, and that's what the 18-month standstill is for. But if there is, a desire for some support for businesses in terms of startup, whether that's banded or whether it's just for smaller businesses, then again, that's the sort of stuff we want to hear. So, long-winded way of saying no, it's not fixed, and we are more than happy to bring any comments back to our members. So
it is still a proposal, and you will be collating all of the responses and then putting them to the 74 elected members, and some of whom I can see here. 2 seconds. I think Colin's wanting to ask something, and then Beth will come to you. If we can have the microphone, Joe, down at the front. Colin.
Yeah, just a couple of very quick responses. We get that the 18-month implementation scheme will help with the collection system, but it does make it hard to respond to a consultation when you don't know the complexity of that collection scheme. On the Scottish Government issue, deposit return scheme, protected marine environments, we know the Scottish Government are not beyond changing their mind, and we can be certain that if you were to work with us on trying to get the Scottish Government to change their mind, we'd have far more chance of that happening. I don't think it's a done deal if we collectively work on it together.
I'm just going to give Malcolm a quick chance to come back to that. Are you in a position to come back to that? And I know you're not a councillor, but you're an official.
Yeah, listen, I've already spoken to Colin. I've spoken to one of the other chambers. I haven't quite got round to everybody. And we want to work with the chambers, absolutely. There are some things I think are in the more easy to do boxes, and some are more complex. But, you know, we've already agreed to have a dialogue as part of this process to try and work out a response to the views the chambers have put across. So I certainly, for one, and I know my members will support me, is we want to work with the chambers as much as possible, but always bearing in mind we have the legislative tools available and we are trying to work within what we've got.
Of course. Thank you for clarifying that. And can I also just come back to you quickly and say, just because something is difficult doesn't mean that we don't fight against it and we keep going, because I think there's a strong swell of room. Yes, there's a lady in the front row with a microphone. If you could just tell us who you are, and you probably can't see through me.
Hi, is this on?
Yes, it's on.
Hi, this is for Malcolm, obviously from the Highland Council. I've got a question. My name's Deborah Carmichael, and for clarity, I'm from a campaign group called the Highlands Against Unfair Levy. And my question to you is, we read obviously all 84 pages of the legislation that was passed through government, may add very poorly. There's actually very little parts of that legislation that's either sensible or workable. I think we can all agree with that, yes? But my question to you is, you say that's not a foregone conclusion by the Highland Council, right? However, Ken Gowan, and a close family member, has got a permanent post already for this job. How is that possible, even before the consultations took place? So I ask you again, is it a foregone conclusion? Because I'm not sure I believe you.
Malcolm.
So the question I was asked was around the form of the levy. That was the question I was asked, about 5%.
Yep.
And that's the question I answered.
And whether it's a foregone conclusion.
We're not going to comment on individuals involved in the council, but the simple fact is that the council has agreed that the principle of the levy is something we wish to pursue. What I am saying is that this consultation is about the different elements of that. So that's the feedback we're keen to receive.
Well, I think the answer is no. The answer that Malcolm has given, and has given it a few times, is no. And I believe that there is one person, you can't comment on this, Malcolm, but I can. There is somebody who's in post and it's a 2-year fixed contract. This much we know. And my understanding is that may take it through to the end of a consultation period, if it goes ahead.
This seems strange to appoint a permanent job for something that might not happen.
2-year contract. 2-year contract. But yes, I take your point. Thank you for very... Could you wait for the microphone, please? Sorry, because otherwise your comments won't be picked up.
Hi, my name's John Jarvis Jones. I applied for a Freedom of Information regarding that position, and within that, the answer I came back is the person that's been mentioned. The post holder is a relative of a council officer, correct? Sheila here is the boss for this person, and it is a permanent position, it's said.
Sorry, Nicky, can I just be really clear, and irrespective of who individuals are, we employ across the council a huge range of project, programme and portfolio managers who deal with a project and they move on to something else. The period of involvement in relation to the visitor levy will be in relation to the visitor levy, the same as I've got someone working on redesigning my road service. Once that's done, they'll move on to something else. So with respect, I don't think this is particularly relevant to the overall discussion we're trying to have today. And with respect, I mean, but that explains it. We move from project to project, and I'm sure any big business in this room will be doing exactly the same with good project managers. That's what they do. They move from job to job.
I probably would have done that once I've done the consultation. Though.
Well, but somebody needs to manage the consultation. I'm guessing. I'm guessing. I'm here impartially, and I'm just guessing that somebody needs to manage the consultation. They've been put into that place for a while. I'm guessing if it goes to the 74 members, and I'm looking 3 of them in the eye right here, and they say, do you know what, we don't think it's a good idea for now, and we'll maybe park it, or they say yes or whatever, and it goes, then they'll be moved on to another role. But I'm glad you've raised it, because it is something that I've seen a lot of comments about, and it was raised with us a few times, so it's good to get it up and out. But I think from the purposes of today, it's probably asked and answered. Right. The next big thing was comparison with Edinburgh. The legislation came in. Edinburgh had been doing consultation for a very long time, and they said, yes, this is what we want to do. And they have come up with their plan. Mark Crothel's statement, which I read out, has picked holes in what Edinburgh is doing and is really, really pushing with them to make some changes. It looks as though Highland Council have said Edinburgh are way ahead of us, and we shall then follow the model that they've had. But what we've got is a city, an internationally renowned city, not saying that Inverness isn't, by the way, with an absolutely all year round tourist industry. And we've got Inverness, which is a much smaller city, and we've got a very, very rural area, very large rural area that surrounds it. Is it the case that it's been Edinburgh's doing it, they've done the consultation, this is going to work for them, we're going to borrow that and take it for us, without much thought of Highlandising it? Oh, that's an awful word, but I think you probably all know what I mean. And I'm afraid that's probably a question for you as well, Malcolm. Do you still have the microphone?
I do. And actually, I don't think it's just as simple as that in terms of following the Edinburgh model. And I think if people do, and I would encourage you to, it's quite a good read. Our sustainable tourism strategy kind of sets out the Highland elements of this. You know, the things that I deal with on a day-to-day basis in terms of some of the pressures we're under, whether that's in terms of motorhomes or in terms of paths, in terms of roads, in terms of toilets, whatever it might be. So I think where we are actually different from Edinburgh, and some have seen it and seen it as a criticism, but actually where we're ahead of Edinburgh, in my view, is that we can shape what any eventual levy is spent on. I think we've got that ability. We've got our 5 areas of focus within the sustainable tourism strategy. But actually, once the Visitor Levy Forum, if it is brought forward, and indeed the next 3 months, if we can get good engagement from industry around reference groups, I'm not going to sing.
A musical interlude. That's quite pleasant, actually.
If we get good, you know, if we can work together to shape the levy to do whatever we wanted to do, is what I'm trying to say. We know the pressures we've got in Highland, and we also know where the ambition is. So my hope is that at the end of this process, however long it takes, and whatever pause or not is put in place, we can get to a point where we don't have to Highlandise it, the back of Edinburgh. We create our own Highland. We've got the starting point. So let's all work together, because I'm sure as businesses, you receive some of the same comments that I do. It's just that people tend to ask me to do something about it rather than just talk about it. So I hope that answers the question. It's not just about jumping on Edinburgh. We want to make sure this works for us.
Thank you. Hang on to that. It might be coming back to you, Malcolm. Is the bad news? You're in the hot spot. We've talked about £10 million. We have a question from a gentleman at the back. Do you have a microphone there? Thank you very much.
My name's Chris Russell. I run a small B&B with my wife on the shores of Loch Ness. Having read the legislation and having heard what the gentleman's just told us, I'm sorry, but I just don't get that. If you look at the basic tenet of the legislation, it is geared entirely towards accommodation, towards hotel rooms. There is no capacity within that document whatsoever to take into account camper vans or cruise ships or campers. I think if you ask people around the Highland area, particularly around our area, about the constant aggravations that are caused to us through the summer by tourists, the vast majority are put at the feet of camper vans who litter and leave their rubbish everywhere, and at campers who just leave their tents and clear off or defecate in the bushes and disappear. The fact that there's no consideration for these groups of people shows that it's a very, very unfair piece of legislation. It is targeted at what I've come to understand over the last couple of days we call international cities. The Highlands is not an international city. It is an entire geographical area. It has no relevance or continuity with a city like Edinburgh whatsoever. It is a unique entity in its own right, and it needs to be considered as a unique entity in its own right. Just looking at the figures.
Is there a question in there, sir?
Rather than a statement.
There is
2 questions in here.
Could I ask you to get to it fairly quickly, because we are tight for time?
Yes, apologies. So, 2 questions. One, can I ask if any of the assembled members here today are willing to take up the cudgels on behalf of accommodation providers in the Highlands to challenge the Scottish Government as to the legitimacy and the equality of this piece of legislation and say this is not something that affects us?
Well, I'm not a panellist, but I think that is something that has been discussed.
The other question I'd like to raise, and then I'll sit down, honest. We're expected to make 10 million quid out of this, minus the £500,000 in costs, including the £55,000 for the temporary appointment. Just looking at the visitscotland.org, the figures for last year showed 7.64 million total nights spent in accommodations in the Highlands by international and domestic visitors in 2023. I'm not a mathematician, but if we were to charge every one of those visitors to the Highlands equally, £2 each, we would actually make 15 million quid out of it, without the massive inconvenience that it's going to result to everybody that's here. So
that's an incredibly good point, sir, but unfortunately the legislation doesn't allow for there to be a fixed fee.
So why can't we challenge the legislation?
Yep.
That was my question,
Can
we get commitment from the people that are sat before us that on our behalf they will take the Scottish Government to task over this? I don't think there's any doubt, one way or another, there's going to be a visitor levy. We can't escape the fact. The problem is, it's unfair, it's ill thought out, it's badly conceived, and it needs to be challenged.
So
Will you people challenge it?
Let's let them answer your question. Will you challenge the legislation on behalf of Highland Council? Malcolm?
What I will do is hear what's been said today and bring it back to the members who are in a position to do that politically. So I'm more than happy to listen to, and we can have our conversations as we move forward, as we're planning to do so. But I am glad the gentleman raised the issue of motorhome and a cruise ship levy, because actually that is something we will be full square behind in terms of trying to find a means of making sure there is equity across the whole sector. Because if you're welcome to my world is all I was thinking as you were talking about some of the issues that we have to deal with. And I'm more than happy to take that element of it forward. But listen, I'm listening, I'm hearing what you're saying, and we will take that back as part of our response from today.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, for that. And also another...
No, then.
That's not well.
I'm
so
not
the gentleman at the back has heard
commitment.
No. What Malcolm has said, it's not Malcolm's decision. In all respect to him, it's not his...
Then who do we need to speak to? Why? I mean, Malcolm is here to take opinions, that's fine. But who do we need to speak to get a commitment on this?
Well, we have 3 Highland councillors here. Could we have a microphone, please?
So would the Highland councillors commit to taking this to the Scottish?
Well, we have 3 Highland councillors here, so if we can pass it to... You'd better introduce yourself, sir.
I'm Councillor Ian Brown. I represent the city leader. Now, I'm actually here to listen, not to speak. I had no intention of speaking. As Malcolm has said, this will come back to members and we'll make the decisions. There'll be a recommendation, but we've got to let the consultation take its place, take its course before we do say anything. I'm not going to commit to anything here, but I've got 2 of my colleagues here, and we've never mentioned this between each other. We have never spoken to it. I have no idea what will happen, what our decision will make. So it certainly is open. There is no decision being made at all.
So you're here with open ears, listening to what's being said. Your points will be taken on board. Sir, can we have a guarantee from you, Ian, that you will take this on board?
We will listen to the full consultation.
And you've had that from Malcolm as well. I suppose the difficulty we have is that a lot of this is the Scottish Government legislation, that a lot of the anger in the room is being directed towards, and a lot of the comments are being directed towards. Highland Council then need to decide, do we go back to the Scottish Government and say this isn't good enough, we're not playing and we want to do it our own way, or whether, yes, they decide that the £10 million sum that has been discussed is something that is worth going for and they will do it regardless. Isabel Mackenzie, if you've got, yes, you've still got the microphone, Ian. Isabel, you're another councillor.
Thank you very much.
Briefly, if you can, sorry.
I would ask and encourage everyone to do the consultation, but to also keep lobbying us in local elected parliament and Holyrood. So please use your voice and lobby everybody that you can. Thank you.
Lobby everyone that you can. And Isabel Mackenzie's personal website, or her councillor's website, email address is on the Highland Council website. Yes, sir. A trio.
Yeah, Michael Gregson, councillor for Inverness Central. I agree absolutely with Isabel and Ian. Submit your thoughts on the consultation. I've already heard folk in centre of Inverness who are sceptical and worried about this along the lines that have been so eloquently expressed today. But I'm very heartened actually by the attitude of let's collaborate and work together, because the Highlands is the whole area stands to perhaps struggle or perhaps benefit, depending on how things turn out. And I'd like to see constructive collaboration, as Malcolm's been urging.
So 3 of the 74 decision makers are in the room at the moment, and that is heartening. At least there was a lady over here with a hand up a second ago, right at the back of the room. Yes. Okay. Claire.
Hello, I'm Claire Winskill. I own Crush House in Elgol. I have a question specifically around the consultation and its being fit for purpose. My understanding is that the consultation should comply with the Scottish Government guidelines in terms of a consultation. The Gunning Principles, point C, consultation should be informative, specifically states that where businesses are involved, there should be a validated impact assessment of the costs and benefits of the options being considered where possible. When is the Highland Council going to do that, please?
So this is the impact assessment. We've talked about the economic impact assessment. Craig mentioned that the Highland Hotels Association got together with Visit Inverness Loch Ness and asked Safries to pool something together, but because of resources it probably wasn't as wide-reaching as it might otherwise have been. Economic impact. Has a study been done? I think there have been some councillors in the press saying we've looked into the economic impact and we don't think that this will have a difference on visitor numbers one way or the other. So where has that come from and what do you know?
So an impact assessment was done, but it was, I would say it was a broad-brushed impact assessment that I think meets our requirements. Clearly, we're getting a lot of information in on economic impact, and again, you know, we'll be spending a lot of time going through what's been put in as part of our feedback and dealing with it in our preparation for a report to members.
I'm sorry, it's just not been done. I'm terribly sorry. I know this isn't a question. So I did a very brief business impact assessment for Skye and Loch Ness, and I can tell you that 50% of the small accommodation operators are considering closing as a result of the challenge of the visitor levy. 42% say it's not viable. They are not viable at any percentage, and 35% will be pushed over the VAT threshold, which will immediately make them insolvent because they will start paying at least 26% in addition in tax, and if they're using the online travel agencies, it will immediately go to 46% of their turnover. They will close, and that's before you get to the issue of seasonality.
And I'm sure you've either shared that or will share it.
I have shared it.
And
I've actually shared it with Douglas.
I look forward to reading it as part of the responses.
I've shared it.
Thank
you.
Victoria, Joint Chair of Visit Inverness Loch Ness, and I'm not sure whether that's the capacity in which you wish to ask your question.
Yeah, no, it's just basically following on from what Claire was saying, is that the impact assessment that you're talking about, is that the 2019 report? Yeah.
Sheila will answer.
Thank you. And then my other question was, I know that when the consultation process did initially start, that
Sorry, did Sheila answer?
No, I said I was just going back to let her, but I just thought I'd get my two in so it's done quickly. I'm just going fast, that's all. So obviously Ken at the start of the consultation process went on live TV stating that one of the questions was there going to be a detrimental impact to businesses, of which he said the evidence that he had seen that did not show that that was the case. Can I have that evidence? I've been asking for it and I've had no response, and I would like to see what exactly that came from. But also 2019, any report is not fit for purpose and needs to be redone, and economic impact surveys need to be from now.
Sheila?
Thank you, Victoria, for the question. On the 14th of November, we took a report to the Economy and Infrastructure Committee, and within that report there is impact assessments. So a business impact assessment was done. You'll notice that it's heavily quoted, HHA is heavily quoted within that, so it's very helpful, the information that Craig submitted to the Council. We did take extracts of that and include that in the business impact assessment. The whole reason we're doing a consultation is to gather more information. So the information that Claire and others are submitting to us will be taken into account and will be fed into the business impact assessment, which we're required to do, in that final report that we take to elected members, so elected members can make an informed decision as to whether or not to implement a visitor levy for Highland.
That evidence is that Ken was talking about?
I'm sorry, I can't comment on that.
Colin, you wanted to come in on that as well? Just hand the mic over there.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know the legislation that Claire's referring to, but I imagine that what most of the room are hoping for, and which I'm pretty sure we've not seen, is an independent economic impact assessment. I don't know if the legislation requires that or not. But yeah, I imagine that's what we need. I will just briefly come back on that camper van point. Although there is no method within the legislation for charging camper vans other than when they're on a campsite, what I think the council would say is that some of the money which is raised can be used to make sure that they cause less damage than they're currently causing. What I'd love to see is the legislation being extended so that whenever someone hired a camper van, then that was also subject to the levy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know that Gavin from Inverness Taxis had his hand up. If you'd like to make your point, please, Gavin.
Hi, Gavin, Inverness Taxis. Been doing business here for 30 years. I think we're going about this all the wrong way. This is not a question, but just my way of thinking. The visitor numbers are down. Profit's less. So, in my mind, as a businessman, what do we need to do to get more people to come here? Certainly not increase the price of things. That's the wrong approach. And yes, in the summer, we're all busy. The tourists are here, and they're here usually to go into the environment, not stay in the city like they would do in London or Edinburgh or Rome. They get out there, have their walks, Loch Ness, and then come back. We're not like one of these cities, so it's a different approach in my mind. But certainly, yes, in the summer, if we have to do something, not that I'm in agreement with it, do it for the summer. But in the winter, when we're cutting hours, laying people off, why are we even thinking about doing it in the quiet period?
Well, that is, thank you very much for that, Gavin, because you've led me beautifully into my next audience survey, but also one of the other questions that had been asked and is on my list to collate on behalf of all of you, was about seasonality. Edinburgh, again, is that city with the year-round tourism. People go, doesn't matter, seem to be what day of the year it is. Edinburgh is pretty well overflowing with tourists. The Highlands are a very, very different beast. Is there an option? Because I think there is in the legislation, but I'm hoping to be corrected or otherwise on this. Is there an option for this being a summer, and however we define summer would need to be part of the consultation as well, but a summer visitor levy rather than an all-year-round one, which may get around some of the difficulty with people travelling for work and hospital appointments and funerals and all sorts of things like that?
So in the legislation, we do have discretion. So again, feedback in the consultation with those views. There are some areas of Highland that are year-round. There's some areas that if you take Badenoch and Strathspey as an example, which is a winter and a summer destination.
Oh, let's not talk about the funicular.
However, the funicular is a really good example of the kinds of visitor infrastructure that is needed to extend seasons and support that. So it's a really good example of where, and the castle I mentioned earlier, you know, there's £25 million going into redeveloping Inverness Castle. I think it's going to be fantastic. The projections for the number of visitors is absolutely fantastic. But, you know, my job in the council is to say, well, what's the next castle? Where's the next big regeneration project? And you know, part of my driving, you know, ambition for the area is to try and make sure that we're spreading these benefits outside Inverness and looking at year-round attractions that will keep people coming.
So then let's take the temperature in the room. Let's project ourselves forward, if we can, 10 years to when there has been, let's assume this is going ahead, and you know, I'm not in one camp or the other. Let's assume this does go ahead, that there is additional income coming into Highland Council, which is actually helping boost our coffers. It's helping to really build and create and maintain that infrastructure that we need, that Malcolm's talked about. Done things like the store car park with the paid thing there and the shop and everything that's creating local income. It's done that Achmelvich thing. It's been able to subsidise Fort William so that the downhill could happen this year, and it's maybe got the funicular back up and running. I don't know what it can do about the snow, but let's project ourselves forward 10 years, and all of these things that the Sustainable Tourism Plan is hoping to achieve have come true. Do we think that with a tourism levy, there will have then been an increase in tourist numbers, a decrease in them, or there'll be little or no impact? So those are your three choices. I don't know if anyone wants to add in anything else, but who thinks there will be, if it all goes well, as we have seen it happen go well in other parts of Europe, if it goes well, who thinks that it could really enhance tourism and therefore attract more people to the Highlands? Hands up now. It's not a tourism levy, it's an accommodation tax. But whatever, well, let's call it an accommodation tax then, if it's working.
You're not asking all tourists to contribute, you're only asking those tourists that have the decency to stay.
Right, we need a microphone here because this is not being captured for the live feed. We're not, well, that, I think, so what you're saying, just while the microphone comes, is it's not a tourist tax, it's an accommodation levy because it's only being charged on overnight accommodation.
You're only asking visitors that stay in serviced accommodation to pay a levy, or for those accommodation providers to pay the levy on behalf of their guests.
So we're talking
So
that
you're only talking about
point.
a particular portion of the guests that come and the tourists that come to the Highlands, and yet you're expecting them to subsidise the whole of the Highlands tourism industry. That's not fair. So you cannot ask us to comment on whether in 10 years' time it will be great. Any money into the area will be good, of course, because we do have infrastructure that needs to be worked on. But why is there a continued push to only ask those guests and those accommodation providers to pay for what is across the board in the Highlands?
Well, at the moment, what we're doing is we're having an information and discussion on the proposal that is on the table. So that is why these are the questions I'm asking.
In the Visitor Levy Act, it says that the government can amend the documentation to include other types of accommodation, including motorhomes and cruise liners, but they have to be approached in order to have that amended. So all of this talking about there's not the legislation, we cannot put it in place. If we feel strongly about it, and I think a lot of people do, then we need to be asking the government to correct the actual Visitors Act to do what we want it to do and be across the board with all tourists. We agree tourists should be charged.
So you agree tourists should be charged. We're asking Highland Council to go back to the Scottish Government and say, change your flawed legislation to include tourist visitors who are coming in on cruise liners and
In every paragraph in the Act itself, it says the Scottish Government can amend the following points, and it talks about the
Let's get an answer to that then, shall we?
So we are making these representations. Sheila, in fact, is working on a group related to the cruise ship levy. Or is it Brian? It's Sheila. She's on the expert group looking at that. And the motorhomes issue is, an issue. Everyone knows it. It's not really the purpose of today. We've tried various things because the legislation doesn't allow it at the moment. So if the legislation gets amended eventually, then brilliant. We'll be behind that. The vast majority of accommodation, I dare say, is what's covered by the visitor levy, and that's what we've got to work with at the moment. But we are making representations on both motorhomes and on the cruise ship levy.
Is it the case then that with the legislation from the Scottish Government being as potentially flawed as it is, that actually it's too soon, that everyone is right? That Highland Hotels Association and the Chambers of Commerce and the Scottish Tourism Alliance are actually right in that there are too many unanswered questions. This is beginning to remind me of when I was pregnant with my first child and my midwife asked me to do a birth plan, and I had never had a baby before, and I had no idea how much it was going to hurt or whether I wanted to go in a pool or wanted an epidural or anything. How can you make a decision on something if you have no experience or you don't have all the facts?
Yeah, I don't know whether that was a question or a statement.
I suppose my question is, how can you make a decision?
But actually,
how can anyone make a decision?
Well,
when
I'm
we
sorry.
don't have the facts?
I think where I do disagree with what your premise, if I might, is it's already been mentioned by several speakers that a tourism levy or a form of visitor tax exists right across Europe, right across the world. We're not dealing with a huge unknown. We're dealing with a number of implementation issues. Now, the vast majority of visitors would come and stay in accommodation here in Europe, in North America, wherever it might be. So we're actually dealing with the legislation we've got. And, we're never going to have, I guess, or certainly my experience is, you're never in a perfect world where everything's covered. So things will change over time. Legislation will change. There's already been a commitment to look at it. But we really have to work with what we've got. And I think whatever people may view, whatever view people may have on the current legislation, you will understand from our point of view that's what we've got to work with, and that's what we are working on, and that's what we're consulting on, because that's the tools we've got ahead in front of us.
Now, those are the tools you've got in front of us, but you have the choice as to whether you take part. And I get it. Highland Council is as cash-strapped as every other. We need the money. I can see the attraction. But is this not perhaps, I suppose what we're hearing is it's too flawed. Who would be happier to pause? Hands up, to pause? Pause and get it right first time. Have those of you who have made how many of you have made representation already, filled in the consultation form already? And how many of you have asked for that? Okay, not everybody who've made representation have asked for that. Can we not just press pause on this just now until we have the information that we need with which to get a really good tourism tax, visitor levy, whatever we decide to call it, and it works for everybody? Yes or no?
So is that a question?
Yes. Can we pause? Should we pause?
We have set out the consultation period till the 31st of March. We will take on board. Now, you'll appreciate from my point of view, okay, you're a group of one particular sector. There are other sectors out there who have their own views, which may be different from your views. And I'm sorry to say that, but that's the truth. I deal with communities who have real issues with tourists, who have real issues with over-tourism, who have real issues with lack of infrastructure, who have real issues with the state of, despite the great job we do, there are issues with our roads and various other types of infrastructure. So you'll appreciate from my point of view, I'm taking on board that you're saying you want to pause. That'll be married up with what other groups of interest will be saying. That's my job, and certainly.
We can't have you asking questions when you don't have a microphone. And actually, I've got lots of other people with their hands up and really keen, so if you can keep it really, really brief, thank you.
If you're saying that there are other groups that have got real issues, as you keep emphasising the word real issues, we are being expected to make the payment to cover those other groups' funding then. That's how that comes across, unless you wish to change the way you've worded it.
No, I'm not going to change the way I worded it. The visitor levy, so the visitor will be paying a proportion of their costs. The visitor will be paying a proportion of their costs towards these infrastructure improvements, which will be determined in consultation with the visitor levy group. Now, Nikki, I'm very sorry, but I have something on at 2 o'clock. I think I did say I could only stay
at 2 o'clock. You're 45 minutes late.
Sorry, at 3 o'clock.
At 3 o'clock, yes, of course.
I am not running away. I'm very sorry. And Sheila is here to be here for the rest of the... But it was a previously arranged commitment.
I completely appreciate that. And it is still my plan that we wrap up as close to 3 o'clock as we can. But I do appreciate that. Yeah, sorry.
So would the audience mind if I took my leave? Because I do have to be back for a meeting. But Sheila is more than capable. In fact, more than capable than me. So...
Can we just please thank Malcolm very much for being here and for listening and for answering all the questions as well as he could. Malcolm, thank you very much.
And listen, thank you very much. And the reality is we want to work with you, so please get in touch and contribute.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Thank you. Question here from another elected member of the council and a Deputy Provost of Inverness, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. I'm Morven Reid. I'm the independent member for Culloden and Ardusir. I'd be more than happy to support any response to the Scottish Government on from what you were saying earlier on. What I would like to say to all of you is that since this has come to the table, I've had less than 5 communications from people in my ward. Please contact your elected members and let them know how you feel. This could be an incredible thing for the Highlands, or it could be a disaster. We need to work together to get it right. So please get in touch with your councillors.
Thank you very much, Morven. And if we could have the microphone right down to the front. Come on, Joe. Chop, chop, chop. Thank you very much. David, just introduce yourself to the room.
Hello. Yeah, David Whiteford, Chair of Highland Coast Hotels. I fear, if we had a vote for 10 years' time, sadly, I wouldn't be here, and sadly, nor would all of our 7 hotels. And it's a really, really heavy heart. I say that. And I'm a farmer too, and I think this is potentially, we use straw, and this is potentially the last straw on top of all of the other things. So I think it's inappropriate. And I have to say, Malcolm's not the person we get. He's a great guy, and he works damned hard, and I've absolutely no issue with him. But what I would ask is that we really, really give this consideration. We have taken up something. It's a one-size-fits-all from Edinburgh to here. This is an area the size of Belgium and Wales put together. It's not an international city. It's very different. I think it's laziness that we've picked that up. We want camper vans. We want tourist ships, as many others that I'm sure would want to contribute onto this. Meanwhile, we've been given a good deal from the Barnett formula. Why don't we pick up the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund again? That was a massively successful bit of legislation that's supported by bids. Clearly, there was a limited amount of funding. Why don't we get more of that back into the Highlands in the meantime? But just as Colin says, if you've got a wrong piece of legislation, we should look to repeal it and start again. That's what happened. I'm in the food and drink sector too. The deposit return scheme was badly set up. It was badly thought through. It wasn't fit for purpose. So let's go back and start again. So if Inverness Loch Ness, they've done a great job today. If they're going to have another event, let's have Scottish Government at it. They need to answer for that.
I'm very conscious that we don't have anyone from the Scottish Government here, and that Malcolm and now Sheila in his part for the next 5 minutes.
Sheila, would you support us repealing this and start again? That's the question.
So, like Malcolm, I'm in a politically restricted post, so I cannot make any comment at all on that regard. But I would just echo everything that's been said today about it's really important that you participate in the consultation. Going back to a point that was made earlier, the legislation has been made available. Would you all have thought it appropriate for elected members to make a decision without consultation not to proceed? That is the purpose of the consultation, so that our elected members can make a decision to proceed or to not proceed. So it's really important that everybody engages with the consultation, that you feed in your feedback. We will provide that to elected members so that they can make an informed decision. It's not a predetermined decision. It genuinely is a consultation. And based on the information which we're receiving, we will analyse the feedback received, and elected members that can then look at it. It would not have been appropriate for elected members to look at the discretionary power and make a decision without consulting with the individuals and the businesses it was going to impact. So it's really important we're doing this consultation. We all have different views about it, but please, it's really important we collaborate and we engage with the consultation process. Thank you.
Yes, Sharon with her hand up in the middle, and then we'll come to, was there a hand up at the back corner? Yes, we'll come to you after that. I'll introduce you while the microphone's getting to you. Sharon Mackay, I think Dornoch bid?
Yes, happy to say in Dornoch bid. And we, I think, have heard today a great concern about the 5% sort of given to us or dictated to us. There's been no impact assessment study done, we've heard, across the area, and 5% issue is clearly a massive impact that could be really negative. The consultation, Sheila, doesn't give us the option to choose anything below that, and I get that it's legislative positioning that sets out your consultation as it stands. Can you give us a guarantee that this online, well, I know it's been filmed, streamed live online, can we make sure today that this event is shared with all the elected members so that they can hear the real grave concerns that have been expressed by this sector that is one of the main pillars of the economy of the Highlands? Can you give us your word that you will make sure that all the elected members get to have a copy of this online live streamed event today, please?
Thanks for that, Sharon. This is your event, it's not our event, so it'll be for yourselves to share that with our elected members.
Visit Inverness Loch Ness, can we have that assurance? Yes, that was a double yes there. That will be shared. Best to get it to you to then get it to the elected members, or we can discuss that? We can discuss the nitty-gritty of that later. Perfect. Yep.
That's a yes.
That's a yes. And there was a lady in the back corner with a hand up as well. We'll come to you. And then I would like to very, very quickly, in the 2 minutes that we have left, ask 5% of what? So, because I think that's been room rate, but does that take into account all sorts of other things? Yes, your question.
Yeah, Ellie Russell from Foyers Bay. You state that this tax is going to raise 10 million and it will cost you 550,000 a year approximately to administrate this, which you get to take out of the money collected by us. But you've not given any indication as to whether the businesses collecting the tax for you will be compensated for their costs and by how much. This is going to cost us extra money in OT fees and credit card fees, whether we like it or not. For example, a 3-room bed and breakfast charging £100 a night over 245 nights would have 745 available room nights. This would bring a turnover of 73,000. Total levy to the council would be about 3,200 for that year. Total increase in OTA fees on these bookings would be £485. Total increase in credit card fees for collecting that money to us would be £80. So the total cost to a business to have this levy on their accommodation charge is £565 a year, just on those two things. How are you going to compensate us for this?
Well, I'm wondering if there's a question before that, of or are you going to compensate?
That was the question,
so,
is do you plan to? Because it's not in any of your documentation. You have written that
okay,
you
can we give her a chance to answer? Yeah, thank you. You have a really clear question, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you. It's a great opportunity.
Mike, please.
Thank you. Is that it? Yeah. Yeah, and it's a great opportunity to answer that question because that is part of the process of the consultation. So we're listening, we're hearing very strongly that there will be business costs. What we're asking back is help us shape what that will look like. So how can we help to alleviate those costs? What can we do? But that will be a conversation that we will have in the reference group, for example. I think Colin referred to it in Colin's presentation. The first meeting of that reference group is this Friday, and we will work with the reference group to understand what could the council do to help alleviate those costs for business. So we've heard that very clearly, very loudly, and we acknowledge that there are costs associated with administering the levy for business.
Who's in that reference group? Sorry, the question there was who is in that group. Do we yet know?
Oh,
yes?
Yes, we do. The invites have gone out, and I'm sorry, Victoria, I don't have it on the top of my head. But we do have a reference group, and the invites have gone out.
I've been invited onto reference
So,
group.
do you want to use the microphone, please, Colin?
Sorry, I've been invited onto reference groups, so of the other chambers of commerce and the Highlands. I've no idea who else was there. It looked like about 20 people. But that should be a very easy question to answer.
The core group is the Highland Tourism Partnership, and some have been added in. So, but I don't have the individual names. I'm really sorry, Victoria.
But I'm guessing that can be shared. It's not a matter. It's not a secret, is it?
No, not at all.
No. So that could be shared with Visit Inverness Loch Ness, and then shared with everyone who is here. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that some of you will be really keen to still ask questions, but I also know that some of you will have commitments beyond this meeting. My promise to you was that we would finish at around about 3 o'clock, and that I very much still hope to do. I would now, though, like to invite our panellists, if there's any final words based on anything that has come up, I would like them to, if anyone would like to sort of put in a closing statement. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask those questions again. Sir, I will be asking the same 3 questions that I asked beforehand, but noted, thank you very much. I missed bits and pieces out. And I'd like to know if anyone has changed their mind on anything based on anything they have heard today. Would any of you like to make a sort of final closing 10 seconds, anything?
Just to the elected members in the room, thank you very much for coming along this afternoon and listening to what we've got to say. You can hear the passion in the room, and we really want to make sure that that information that's provided through the consultation document is given to you in enough time to be able to digest and make a decision on. Thank you.
Yeah, very briefly, I've got the utmost respect for both Malcolm and Sheila. I think the key to this is collaboration. I don't believe the council's minds are closed on it. I think there is room to collaborate. But I'm still of the view that the consultation has been too early. We need firmer plans on spending. We need firmer plans on how the levy is going to be collected so that the accommodation providers know what they're faced with. But the main issues are not in Highland Council's gift. It's in a badly written bit of legislation. I don't think it's beyond us to challenge that. As Chambers of Commerce, we're certainly happy to challenge it. Did we have to go to consultation first? That, to me, no, I'm not convinced that we had to go to consultation first. I think the combined groups in this room, Hotel Association, Visit Inverness Loch Ness, Chambers, with the council, with elected members, could have challenged that very successfully. And I think that's still open to us.
Sheila?
First of all, thank you for inviting us today. It's great to have the opportunity to speak with you and to listen to you. I would just like to really, really emphasise the importance. It's really important that you do all complete the consultation and put your feedback back in. Really important.
Okay, thank you very much. So can I just ask, rather than asking those 3 questions again, has anybody changed their mind? Has anyone had their mind changed? Anyone more reassured? Yes, Claire. Microphone, please. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm afraid, given what I've heard today, I'm now totally against the visitor levy because I cannot see that the council is making any changes in terms of, despite everything that's been said. To me, it still looks as if it's a done deal, and I'll be absolutely astonished if anything changes as a result of this meeting today, I'm afraid. I think, Colin, you've done a fantastic job in the Chambers. I fully support the pause, but to me, it looks as if the Highland Council is being totally intransigent and is not listening to what is being said.
Well, I think the Highland Council have said they will listen. So consultation is still open, is all I can say. Consultation is still open, and it is open until the 31st of March. Get all your comments on there and make sure that if what you want is pause or stop, then that is absolutely clear. My understanding is that from Malcolm and from Sheila is that that will all be collated. It will be put to the elected representatives, 4 of whom are in the room today. So there's only another 70 who really need to feel and hear your passion. And then they will decide. And it may well be that collectively and with the support of the Chambers, the Hotel Association, of Visit Inverness Loch Ness, representation can be made to the Scottish Government to get a better bit of legislation, to perhaps get a proper kind of tax that doesn't tax your businesses, but taxes the people who come and enjoy our wonderful part of the world, just in the same way as we're taxed when we go to theirs. And we can all benefit. The tide will come in and all will rise. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so... Can I say one more thing? I wonder if you'd be saying that if we wasn't... Go up. One.
I don't see the council as completely intransigent, and I'm raising this to give you a good example. Back in November, the council said they would only do online consultation. The 4 chambers are currently talking to council, and it looks like we will have a series of 4 online and 4 in-person consultations with council funding run by the 4 individual chambers, so in different people's different areas, and they should be around the beginning of March. So I guess part of my message is, yes, you must fill in that consultation. You don't have to do it till the 31st of March. There's going to be a lot happens between now and the 31st of March. So you can wait till later on in that process. You can wait for that next session of meetings. But in the meantime, talk to your councillors, talk to your MSPs.
You must speak to your local councillors. They're the ones that are going to vote on this. Don't please forget it. And I think the consultation...
Tony, we can't hear you. You've got an audience at home as well.
Right. Just very, very concisely, you must speak to your local councillors. They will take the decision on this. They will listen to us. I think we know that we're here. At one point we're saying, yes, we will try and take this back to Scottish Government, and then it kind of disappears again. I'm not convinced. I think you should be speaking to your MSPs, you should be speaking to your local councillors, and be as vocal as you possibly can. If you have employees, without scaring the pants off them, you should make them aware that this is something that might affect them as well. It's in our hands to do something about it. The consultation, I think, is a one-shot from an email address. So you be careful that you can't just go back and dip in and dip out. Once you've made one response, I believe that is it.
Yeah, but who's only got one email address these days? You didn't hear that from me. Ladies and gentlemen, I do insist on having the very last word. Thank you all so much for coming, for sitting through these 2 hours, for listening, for being really polite, really sort of respectful of what's been said. I know there's been some things that are really, really hard to swallow, and I know that there is a lot more to come, but I very, very much hope that whatever happens, it is absolutely the right result for the whole of Highlands and the right result for all of your businesses, and that in 10 years' time, if we were to come back, then I would be able to ask the question, and we would be able to look back and say, well, thank goodness we filled in the consultation. Thank goodness we all came and shouted at Malcolm and Sheila, and thank goodness they came and fed everything back. The councillors, everybody worked together, and look at the result we have. Ladies and gentlemen, this is just the start of the consultation period. I wish you all the very, very best with it. Thank you for coming, and please do stay in touch with everybody who needs to be heard, to hear your views, shall I put it that way. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, and thank you to our panellists.